Dear friends in Christ, every once in a while I do go to a gym. I try to do something healthy. And there, like all gyms, there's an area with treadmills and stationary bikes and ellipticals and that kind of thing. And this area is at the back of the gym, and there are windows that look out onto a cemetery next door. And I have to admit that there are times when I don't really feel like going, and I'll look out the window as I'm on the treadmill, and I think, what's the point? I'm just going to end up there anyway. And yes, this is technically true, but what a fatalistic way of thinking. And without faith, I don't see how we could get around that. What a miserable way to go through life. But as Christians, we should not give in to this temptation to fatalism, that everything is already decided anyway. So what does it matter what I do? That's because our Christian faith gives us hope. And hope is the opposite of fatalism and despair. Why do we have cause for hope? Because Jesus Christ rose from the dead and has the power to raise us from the dead also. And he has promised to do it if we believe in him. Jesus demonstrates his power over death in today's gospel reading from John, in which Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. 4 days, that means there's no question that he's dead. And to Martha and Mary and all their friends, Lazarus' death was a great tragedy, as the death of any loved one would be. And we hear Martha's sorrow when she says to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Has there been a time in your own life when you have experienced some kind of hardship or tragedy that made it difficult or even impossible to recognize God's presence? Perhaps you could not understand why God permitted it to happen. Perhaps you felt that God had abandoned you. Why would you let this happen, Lord? You might have asked. What is the point of this? Why would you permit this suffering? And yet the pain and the suffering of this life do not have to be pointless. Let us hear again Jesus' words when he had been told that Lazarus is ill. This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God. The suffering and death of this life are not meaningless. God can use them for his purposes, even though they are often hidden from us. Jesus could certainly have prevented Lazarus' death, but in the end, he did permit it because there was a greater good to be revealed. And that greater good was the truth that Jesus has power over death. Death, this horrible thing that everybody is afraid of and spends their whole life dreading, that separates loved ones and causes so much grief and sorrow. Jesus has power over it, and he has promised to conquer it once and for all. And this belief should give us hope and even peace. And Martha gives voice to that hope in today's gospel. After she says to Jesus, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died," she adds, "But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, he will give you." Her faith in Christ gives her reason to hope. And there is hope in what God has promised us and what he has in store for us. There's hope to be found in his mercy and love. And there's hope in his words proclaimed in the first reading by the prophet Ezekiel, "O my people, I will open your graves and have you rise from them." Or as St. Paul says in his letter to the Romans, "If the spirit of the one who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, the one who raised Christ from the dead will give life to your mortal bodies also." You heard that right. Someday we are going to get new and improved bodies. If that is not a cause for hope, I don't know what is. And where else do we see signs of hope? One example, I think, is in the Rodriguez family from Cuba, who our parish has been sponsoring. For 3 years, the father Amauris lived and worked in Brazil, separated from his family in Cuba. And they were unable to come join him, and they were unable to even visit him. And during this difficult time of separation, he was working to save money for the day when he would have enough to get the family out of Cuba, when they could live somewhere together in freedom. And there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of doubt. But in the end, the hope that they had held on to was fulfilled. And now they are beginning a new life together in our community. And this has been a blessing for us as well. God gives us signs of his love, reasons to hope all the time. They are all around us, even though sometimes they can be hard to see. And the Mass is one of these signs of hope. In it, he reveals himself to us through his word and in the Eucharist, his very body and blood. We receive Christ as spiritual food and are strengthened by it to continue to live our life of faith and to live in hope, even when there seems to be so much darkness. So how do we live this hope? If we have hope, we do not have to live in fear. Hope helps us to recognize the Lord's power and that everything is in his hands. And when we feel that we have no control, we can surrender to God our desire to be in control. When we feel helpless in a situation that we're confronted with, we can surrender our helplessness to God and ask him to bring good out of the situation. And we can also share with others the hope that our faith gives us, bringing hope to those who are in despair. And this can be done through actions and through words, listening to them, giving them some words of encouragement, letting them know that they're not alone. Through the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, like feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting the sick, and so on, we can bring the hope of Christ to others. So I encourage you to think of something this week that gives you hope and write it down on a piece of paper and put it somewhere where you'll see it every day as a reminder to hope during the season of Lent. And let us listen for Christ's voice calling us to come out of our tombs. He calls us even now to come out of the tombs of fear that enclose us and the tombs of sinfulness that entrap us. And one day he will call us to come out of our tombs where our bodies will be laid to rest. When he called Lazarus to come out of his tomb, Jesus then said to the onlookers, "Untie him and let him go." It was only when he said this that Lazarus was freed from the bondage of death. And Jesus seeks to do the same for each one of us. He desires that we be free of the bondage of sin and fear and hopelessness and death. For this, we have reason to live in hope.